what in the world could this possibly be about? Well, Google, a couple days ago, gave a particular person back in the 1840s credit for all this hand washing that you're doing. I mean, you're supposed to wash your hands, 5 times a day. You're supposed to put soap and let it lather up and for at least 20 seconds so it breaks down the fat molecules and therefore lifts the virus off your skins. Okay, fine. Where did that start? Well, why didn't Google honor the Bible? Because that's where it started. Well, we'll get to that in just a minute. You see, the Bible's at least 3,000 years ahead of the medical breakthrough in the 1800s. So what we're going to do is try to expose some of the biases of our culture that has against the Bible, but mainly we're going to prove that the Bible has to have a miraculous source. Psalms 18, thy word is proven. 1 Thessalonians 5:21, thy word is proven. And we're supposed to prove all things. Yes, let's look at some of the science that's occurred over the last few thousand years and compare it to what the Bible had. We're going to explore evidences from medicine, go inside the human body, and we're going to ask basically 2 questions. How did the Bible know that 3,000 years ago? And then number 2 is, when the Bible recorded certain things, how did it leave out the errors of science 3,000 years ago? Well, whenever you pick up a Bible, you may not think of it this way, but you've picked up a miracle. And yet, what does our culture say? Oh, no. The Bible's just a bunch of old men many years ago wrote this thing. It's been edited over the years. That's where the Bible came from. They're not about to admit that the Bible has a miraculous source. Well, you can go to miraculousbible.org, and this lesson should be up there eventually as a link. And there's the full lesson up there already. But what we're going to cover tonight is a little bit more limited. There's about 10% of that long lesson up there. So I'll be able to give you a little bit more details since it's only 10% of it. Bible just for men? No. When did medicine start catching up with the Bible? Not until the last 200 years. We kind of take things for granted, like hygiene. What's the Bible say about hygiene? Well, if you compare what the Bible said against all other ancient cultures, no other law code in any civilization on this planet is even close to the hygiene laws laid down in the Bible. I'll give you an example. If you were in Sweden back in the 1800s and you had leprosy, you could still go door to door and knock doors and sell your salesman type stuff. They didn't understand communicable diseases. They didn't know what a germ was, folks. In Exodus chapter 15, God told his people if they would follow his laws and his statutes, he'd put upon them none of the diseases of the Egyptians. It's then repeated in Deuteronomy 7:15. And the Lord will take away from you all sickness and will afflict you with none of the terrible diseases of Egypt, which you have known. Well, simple question. Does that mean every single time someone got ready to eat something that was rotten and bad or a poisonous fish or anything else, God just turned around and zapped all the bad stuff out of it while they ate it? No. He told them, don't eat that type of fish. Don't eat pork. Don't eat. Yeah. Plenty of details he gave them. If they followed those details, they had a whole lot better health. Those cultures around the world that didn't follow the Jewish type of ideas of hygiene, what happened to them? Well, you've heard of the Black Plague, right? What about the bubonic plague? The bubonic plague wiped out about half the Roman Empire in about 12 years. Then you got the bubonic plague, the Black Death, the 1347 to 1348, 1/4 of Europe. Let me see, we're worried about a coronavirus that they're saying a final death toll might be 1% of the people who actually capture it. Actually, it's going to be between 0.1% and 0.6%, but never mind, okay? That's the general idea. And here they had 25% dead, or half the Roman Empire. Why did they get such terrible results from the plague? Because they did not implement the biblical hygiene laws like they're telling you to do today. Wash your hands with soap. In 1918, the influenza epidemic killed in 4 weeks more people than died in all of World War I. 21 million people worldwide. 850,000 in just the United States. Well, in Leviticus chapter 15, let's go see what the Bible says about hygiene. If you got your Bible either online or on your tablet or your phone, things of that nature, please take it out and follow along. Leviticus chapter 15, or you can read it on the screen if you want. It says, when any man has a discharge from his body. So you could have a skin discharge, maybe you got something coming out of your nose and mouth, things like that. You've got a discharge. And when was Leviticus written? Oh, maybe 1400 BC. If any man has a discharge from his body, his discharge is unclean. Unclean meant isolate from that person. But notice what it said next. Every bed is unclean on which he who has a discharge lies, and everything on which he sits is unclean. Wait a second. You mean this guy's going to go touch something and leave something behind? How did they know that? I mean, he might leave the dirt off his shoes behind, but what's this germ or something that they had no idea existed? Whoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, and be unclean till evening. Someone else comes over and touches that bed? Yeah. He who sits on anything which he who has a discharge sat shall wash his clothes, bathe in water, be unclean until evening. You think they had microscopes to look at those bedclothes? To look at those couches you sat on and see that bacteria? No, I doubt it. Let's keep reading. And he who touches the body of him who has a discharge. You mean your hand has bacteria, viruses, things of that on it? How'd they know that 3,000 years ago? Wait a second. You've got to be kidding me now. Spit? Spit now has bacteria in it? Yeah, spit's on him who is clean. How did they know that? We take it for granted. I'm not about to tell you about a gross habit the Jews had that had something to do with saliva from the mouth. It's so gross, I can't even say it in mixed company at all, okay? They weren't following God's law, okay? But they did something with the spit. Oh, it's pathetic. So how did God's law say this? Well, we all know the answer. Because the Bible's inspired of God. It has a miraculous source. Now this is one of my favorite. Let me illustrate it this way. Vessel of earth. Okay. If you got a vessel that's made out of, like a pottery, it's made an earthen type vessel. If it's made out of some sort of clay, things of that nature, you have to break it and throw it away. And you all heard this lesson before, but let me tell you the full story for those online. I want you to pretend that you are a Jew. And pretend that you lived 3,000 years ago. And I want you to pretend for some of you that you're married. Now we're going to pick on all the guys, all the husbands. The husband comes down with a cold, flu, sickness, virus, whatever it is, okay? They're sick. Something's coming out of them. What does he have to do as a Jew? He now has to isolate himself from everybody else, right? Well, you think while the poor guy's getting over the whatever this is for a couple of weeks, you think his wife's going to let him, well, go fend for yourself. I'm getting out of the house too. No. She's going to feed him, isn't she? Okay, so now she's going to go over to her kitchen. You know, they didn't have big old huge houses like we have, okay? She goes over to the kitchen and she's got these bowls. And the bowls have flour in it and all kinds of other things. And she prepares the food in another bowl. And she goes over to the husband, and hands you your dinner. Now, after a few weeks, when you get over this cold, flu, influenza, whatever it is that you've got, when you get over that, what does she have to do with her bowls? She has to break her bowls? I don't know about you, but Marina wouldn't be too happy with me if every single time I got sick, she had to lose her earthenware. I got to throw away. Done. You better not get sick too often, right? But guess what? The Bible gave you a solution for this too. it said if that bowl was made out of wood, you didn't have to break it and throw it away. You could rinse it, clean it out, reuse it. What? We didn't discover until the last 100 years, probably less than that, we did not discover that most all woods have antibacterial agents in the wood. How did the Bible know that? It sure didn't come from man, did it? No. You see, when medical science starts with the treasure map, they can derive solutions a lot faster and quicker. Unfortunately, medical science has been catching up for a few thousand years, and, well, they don't like to give the Bible the credit. In fact, what has medical science said about certain communicable diseases? Oh, they come up with excuses. Back in the 1800s, they had excuses like bad air. That person got sick because of cosmic telluric influences. No one knew what it was, but that's what they called it, right? And yet, the germ theory of disease that they discovered back in the 1800s was already essentially implied in the Bible. It gave you the solutions for the problem before anybody knew what was causing the problem. You see, when science doesn't start with the Bible, you end up with all kinds of problems. Germs can cause some problems. And Google likes to talk about Ignaz Semmelweis. You notice he didn't live too long. We'll get to some details on that in just a minute. All this hand washing. Google and others go, oh, he's the guy basically instituting all this hand washing idea. Okay. He was the doctor on a ward of pregnant women. A bunch of pregnant women. Okay. And Google, well, they said Dr. Semmelweis is honored for the COVID-19 prevention method. About 3 or 4 days ago. Again, let me repeat. Why are they giving him credit 150 years ago when the Bible said it over 3,000 years ago? In the 1840s, Dr. Ignaz Semmelweis, and this is a statute that they made in his honor, okay? He went to the most famous medical center on the planet, Vienna. Now, in the Vienna hospital, he was put in charge, I believe he was about 28 years of age, okay? He was put in charge of the maternity ward at the hospital. That maternity ward had quite a few beds, quite a few women who were sick who were also pregnant. About 1 out of every 6 died every month. So you think they go, why are these women dying so much? It's about the same percentage as the other hospitals around the world. And it would actually be greater than 1 in 6 women would die during the summer times. There was another ward in this same hospital, but their death rate, instead of being 18%, 20%, was only about 3%. So wouldn't you think all the doctors go over to study the other ward, run their experiments, say, okay, what are you doing different? What are you doing? And what are we doing? Compare the two, make a scientific test, do some statistics, maybe some graphs, and behold, this is what we should change, right? No. These people are scientists, right? I like science. Science is a good thing to get interested in. The number one problem with science is it's done by people. That's your problem. I work at Kennedy Space Center. A lot of scientists out there. They're no more honest than the other groups of people out there. Sometimes they couldn't see the data right in front of their eyes because they have some prejudice. They prejudge. It is just normal, okay? But anyways. So they had a death rate anywhere from 18%, and during the summertime, sometimes it would get up as high as 50%. And compared to the other ward, 3%. The other ward was midwives. Wait a second, midwives they don't have a college degree. They don't have all this training, laboratory equipment. They're just uneducated midwives. I'll tell you, if you're a woman who is sick, who is also pregnant, which ward do you want to be in? You don't want to have anything to do with those doctors. So what did these doctors say? They said, well, you know, these scientists said it must be atmospheric conditions is the reason we have 18% dying. Well, doesn't the other ward have the same atmospheric conditions as you do? Oh, well, don't ask good questions like that. Okay, what's unremitted constipation? Well, how come the midwives ladies don't have that problem? Oh, well, it's delayed lactation or excessive fear. They really thought this, folks. They thought the person coming in and ringing a bell and such was scaring them at night, and therefore they tried all kinds of stuff. They thought maybe laying on the side would help. No, that didn't work. They tried all kinds of stuff. Didn't work. Still dying at 18%. And they even said things like cosmic telluric influences, whatever that is. But somehow the midwives didn't have cosmic telluric influences. Well, they tried all these theories, and they all turned out to be wrong. So let's look at the background of what was going on in this hospital. This Vienna hospital, like most hospitals, the doctors would come to work in the morning, and the first thing they would do is they'd go down to the morgue, and they'd cut open dead bodies. So they put their hands in the dead, rotting flesh. Then they'd all pull out a towel, use some water, and they'd all share the same towel. Oh, I forget to tell you that water didn't have any antiseptics in it. No. Just wipe their hands off. So what'd they do next? They came up and did pelvic exams on pregnant women or any other exams on these women. We take a look at that and go, disgusting. But this was the best medical science out there at the time. Well, in the 1840s, this young doctor, Dr. Semmelweis, after 3 years of his women dying, really tearing at his heart, really just driving him nuts, okay? Well, after 3 years, a good friend of his, Dr. Koletcha, actually went on a vacation. I'm sorry. Semmelweis went on a vacation. Dr. Koletcha was still behind. Got that back, sorry. Well, when Semmelweis comes back from vacation, he finds his good friend, Dr. Koletcha, had died. Well, what had happened? Well, when he was doing some autopsies on dead bodies, the assistant actually bumped him and he cut himself. And so here he had stuck his hand into a pregnant woman's dead body and he picked up what she had had. Now, the disease these women died of was all called the same thing, labor fever. And one of the symptoms of labor fever is you had pus under the skin and pus everywhere and the pus on the eye sockets, just pus, 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 right? So Dr. Koletcha over the next few days started showing all the symptoms of labor fever. Well, they can't call it labor fever. He's a male. Yeah, it's kind of tough. Okay. So he died. Dr. Semmelweis comes back. His good friend's now dead, but the same type of symptoms. And he cut his finger. Well, maybe there's something going on here. So he noticed that the women on his morgue who received more care by the doctors, in other words, they were examined more often, they seemed to have a greater chance of dying. So he said, you know, they didn't know about bacteria, didn't have the microscope yet, but perhaps that bacteria, as we know, on that towel right there, was carrying something to his live patients. In other words, he said, could dead patients have something that is being carried to my live patients on my ward? So here's what he did. The month before he did this, about April of 1847, the typical 18% died, 1 out of 6, okay? Now his ward was fairly large, so that'd be about 57 women would die. So then he forced all the doctors, as soon as they came onto his ward, he forced them to wash their hands in chlorinated water and dry them on a fresh towel. Sounds pretty good, right? So after doing that for a month, what did the data say? Well, in June, after doing this for a month, washing their hands, washing hands, washing hands, and by the way, he became very unpopular. Only 8 women died. You went from 1 in 6 down to 1 in 42? probably one of the best medical breakthroughs of the whole 1800s. So now the doctors changed, right? Oh, yes. Well, they still weren't too happy with him, but he noticed the next thing. He said if doctors came up and examined a woman, and then she happened to come down with a labor fever, and then they examined someone after her, and after her, and after, those women seem to have a chance of catching this labor fever. So now he made them wash their hands in between every patient, every time they examined them. So what happened then? Well, numbers in July went down to 1, washing hands. Went down to, well, is that going to come up? Yeah, 1 at 84. Not showing up on my screen. Okay. Now, if you made a medical breakthrough for 57 dying versus 4 dying, you would think all the medical journals are published across the whole country, then across the world, and everybody would implement this, right? That's just not the way people do science. I told you, the bad part about science is who does it. It's the people. They have their bias and they have their prejudices. They held on to their old explanations. They ridiculed Dr. Semmelweis, continued to deny all this data right in front of him. And he kept getting these results month after month after month, till finally they fired him. They got him kicked out of the hospital. So now's what he's going to do. Well, he goes up the river, goes up the side of the country, goes up to Budapest. Well, in Budapest, he gets a job back in a hospital again, implements the same procedure, but this time he's documenting everything. This is what you all were doing before, and this is the results you got, and here's what I'm getting, document, send it out to people, here's the documentation, here's the evidence, got the same results. So then what happened? They still didn't believe him. He got so frustrated that he started taking certain risks, and it kind of, he'd try something, okay, maybe I can get sick intentionally, and I'll show how this recovers and things like that. He could not get people to listen, got him so frustrated that literally some say he drove himself crazy. And they put him in an insane asylum. And in an insane asylum, I don't know if it was an insane asylum or he went and intentionally gave himself one of these diseases to see how to try to recover from it, and he died from it, okay? So he didn't last too long. 57 to 4. So how are we doing today? How many of you all ever read a book called None of These Diseases? Very good. Excellent book. Dr. Macmillan. Well, Dr. Macmillan wrote this book. His grandson comes along and is also a doctor, but he's a surgeon. And as he's going to medical school, and then he goes over and does his internship at a hospital, so now he's doing surgery on people. He said, I don't think we implement the proper biblically hand washing that we should be doing in the surgery. What? He said, well, the Bible, you not only go over and use a special type water and a special type fluid, which we'll get to in a minute here, okay? You not only do that, but then you let your hands completely dry, because it says you do this on the 3rd day and you do it on the 7th day. So there's plenty of time in between for things to dry. So he had them bring in sun lamps. So after they scrub up before their surgery, they'd have to stick them under a sun lamp and wait for their arms and hands to dry. And then scrub up again and stick them under the sun lamps, wait for the arms and hands to dry, right? Before he'd let any of his team go in and do surgery. What were his results? They track these things in hospitals, your infection rates. He had the lowest infection rates of anybody. No one else even close. So all the doctors say, hey, this is a good idea. Put in sun lamps. You think we're using them down here at the hospitals? I doubt it. Why not? He just proved it works even better. When he finally, I guess you would say, graduated from his internship, they gave a little party for him. And in the party, you ever seen that soap with a rope on it? Rope on the soap? They put that for around necks and called him Dr. Soap. That's the only credit they gave. We're not doing much better, are we? But we do wash hands. Isolation and sanitation. Over 3,000 years ago, the Bible said to isolate dead bodies from live people. Numbers 19, he who touches the dead body. Wait a second, you mean the outside of the skin here has something on it? Don't touch it? I could see an open sore if you touched it, but you're just picking up someone and carrying them over to the grave, right? You're not touching their sores. No, he who touches the dead body of anyone shall be unclean 7 days. He shall purify himself with the water. What is the water? Oh, we'll get there in a minute. The water on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, then he will be able to go out and associate with other people, called being clean. Whoever touches the body of anyone who's died and does not purify himself, he shall be unclean, because the water of purification, that's the water we're talking about. The water is the water of purification, was not sprinkled on him, his uncleanness is still on him. This is the law when a man dies in a tent. All who come into the tent, all who are in the tent, shall be unclean. Now wait a second. You mean they understood about a 6-foot, 10-foot zones, told everything else? You go into a tent and someone else comes to a tent later and they can maybe pick up something you left behind. This is obvious to us. But if you went to a surgeon in the early 1800s, or mid-1800s, or even sometimes the late 1800s, they didn't do any of this stuff. 7 days. But notice this. Every open vessel. What? Remember, husbands, you lived 3,000 years ago, you're a Jew, your wife's feeding you, things of that nature. If she had an open bowl while you're sick, it had to have, well, if it was open, it was unclean. You had to have a cover on it. You mean I got to have a cover to cover up my meal and my flour and things of that nature? Oh, that's obvious to us, folks. You mean the air has bacteria in it that could fall down into it? How did they know this 3,000 years ago? That bacteria right there on that bowl? Yeah. And for an unclean person, they shall take some of the ashes of the heifer. I think it was called red heifer. I don't know how easy it was to get a red cow, but okay. Ashes of a heifer, burnt for purification from sin. Then they had to use running water, so they put them, these ashes and that running water, in a vessel. A clean person shall take hyssop. Hyssop? Hyssop and dip it in the water, sprinkle it on the tent. Okay, so you come over this tent, you take the special water, you take a hyssop plant, you're cutting off the branch, okay, sprinkle it on there, sprinkle it on there. And you got to sprinkle it on the people too. Or on the one who touched the bone, the slain, the dead, or a grave. So here we take our pot with ashes, pour some water in it, heat it up to kind of dry it out a little bit more. Okay, that's what we did a few hundred years ago, because we were doing that to do what? We were doing that to make lye soap. Now lye is quite caustic. You don't want to put straight lye on you. But notice the Bible had water in there. It was fairly dilute. It was excellent at antibacterial agent and cleaning without being too caustic. Now notice it said you're washing your hands under running water. Okay. And notice that hyssop right there. Do you know the hyssop actually has an active ingredient called thymol in it? Or it's a second cousin of thymol, acts the same way. And that's what you see in things like Listerine. The clean person shall sprinkle the unclean on the 3rd day and on the 7th. Wash his clothes, bathe in water, and evening he shall be clean. How did the Bible know that? He who sprinkles the water of purification. Wait a second. We got this water for purification. We put it on different things. So we've taken that hyssop plant, we sprinkled it, sprinkled it, sprinkled it. You've been inside this tent or this house while doing this, on the person, on the walls, on everything else, right? Do you think maybe some of that bacteria might get back into your water? And it might take a little while for it to kill all that stuff, or the concentration might be a little bit high for it? So now the person who does a sprinkling, because he's in that atmosphere, or because the water's not completely tossed out and make a fresh batch, perhaps he needs to isolate himself. Yes. He who touches the water of purification shall be unclean till evening. Whatever the unclean person touches shall be unclean. The person who touches it shall be unclean until evening. What if the governor of Florida instituted these laws? That type of isolation and that type of be unclean, avoid other people. Whew, I don't think coronavirus had much of a chance at all, would it? No. That's what God said. If you diligently heed the voice of the Lord your God, he'll put none of the diseases which they knew down in Egypt upon them. So how does the secular world try to get around this? Well, sometimes they try to appeal to Egyptian medicine. Oh, well, after all, did Moses get the law from the Egyptians? He's raised in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Acts chapter 7, verse 22, right? So maybe the Egyptians had it. Did you know that we have discovered something? The Ebers Papyrus. We have discovered that the Egyptians, according to the rest of the world, people thought the Egyptians had the best doctors. We actually have over 811 of their medical prescriptions. This is what they did for different type of ailments. In fact, let's imagine something else here for a minute. Let's imagine that you grew up in a family where your father was the king of the country. Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Let's keep going here for a minute. Now, let's pick on women first. Women, when you were a little girl, let's say about 8 years of age, maybe 7, something like that, you were out playing somewhere and you got a splinter in your finger. Okay? Got a splinter in your finger? No problem. Well, since your daddy's the king, those countries back then had sent down for the doctors in Egypt to come up and take care of their families. So you got the best doctors in the world to take care of you. And you're an 8-year-old little girl, you got a splinter in your finger, okay. They're going to get an ointment, a salve, put it on the finger, and the little splinter just pop out. You might want to ask yourself, what did they put in the ointment? Well, it turns out for splinters, the Egyptian doctors, top medical doctors on the planet, said, well, you got to take a combination of worm blood, mole, and donkey dung. Oh, wait a second. Doesn't donkey dung have tetanus spores in it? Oh, yeah, probably loaded with it. So if you don't die of lockjaw, the splinter will pop out. Yeah, not too good. Skin diseases? Oh, they got prescription for skin diseases. You take a hog's tooth, combine it with a cat's dung and a dog's dung. Mix it all. Yeah. They like the dried excrement of a child for other remedies. They even had a statement that said this. It is said that the urine of a faithful wife was with them effective in the treatment of sore eyes. This is man's science, okay? In addition, now here's a really sad one. This is pathetic because this was still practiced in the 1800s. It seems like the Egyptians were among the first to present the idea of good and laudable pus. They thought if your skin, you got an open sore, started getting pus on it, that was good. So they would sometimes take the pus from one patient and put it on another to help them heal. More people died of these type of diseases during wartime than what the bullets and the swords and anything else did, because it was this pus was killing people. But they didn't know any better, folks, even in the 1800s. So now I go back to my first question. was the fact that your dad, your father, was the king. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or would you rather have been the poor pauper whose dad couldn't afford those Egyptian doctors? Yeah. That laudable pus, could you imagine taking something and putting it into the guy's back, open sore like that? Yeah. And that's what they did. 1500 BC, the medical knowledge at that particular time. Yes, that was pretty disgusting stuff. I like how Bruce Allen said it. He said, pretty disgusting stuff today. Yet you would think that if these cultures' medical practice were so respected by the rest of the world, the Bible would just mimic what they taught. After all, Moses was raised in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. But it doesn't. Of all the sacred writings of every major religion in the world, only the Bible sidesteps the errors that pervaded the medical sciences of its time. In fact, scholars don't like the Bible. They don't like saying this. They don't like admitting to it. Scholars are nearly unanimous in attributing the world's first system of sanitary laws to the precepts laid down in the first 5 books of the Bible. Yeah. So what is this the Google's doing? COVID-19, washing your hands, isolation, keeps some distance between people, don't have as much contact. Not even close to what the Bible has said, is it? Although I'd rather use some of our soaps than I would having to go out and make my own lye soap and find that red cow and burn them all up in the ashes. A little bit easier to go buy the soap in the stores, okay? So the Bible's 3,000 years ahead of the coronavirus. Long before man ever came up with any solutions whatsoever. Medicine catches up with the Bible. Unlike Egyptian medicine's 811 prescriptions of only about 15% were even positive. And some of them, as you saw, were quite negative. In fact, that dung and urine was the most common ingredient in all their poultices and salves. That was the most common ingredient. I didn't pick just the worst. That was their common ingredients. So we've covered a little bit about germs. We've covered a little bit about labor fever, Semmelweis, sanitation, water for purification, and a little bit about quarantine. And that's pretty much the end of the lesson. But there's more. Not necessarily for tonight, okay? Did you know the Bible talks about blood? It talks about something that science didn't find. Well, George Washington died because they had the wrong idea about blood. The Bible had it right. The Bible has laws about food consumption. Fins and scales? You mean I eat a certain type of fish if it has fins and scales? They haven't found one of those that's poisonous yet? No. Reptiles and salmonella poisoning? You're not supposed to be around the reptiles. The Bible tells you that too, right? No problem. Bats and rabies? You're not supposed to deal with the bats either. The Bible talks about that. Pork consumption. How many of y'all like pork? Raise your hand if you like pork. Not everybody likes pork, right? But we know today you're supposed to cook it really well, right? Because that pork, that pig, what's the difference between him and a cow? Well, a cow, it generally eats better stuff. Pigs sometimes will eat about anything, garbage, everything else, right? So the cow goes over and eats something, and it goes into that stomach, and it spends an awful lot of time getting processed before it finally turns into meat on the cow. How long does it take for that pig to take its food and turn it into meat on the pig? Well, about 24 hours. And since it eats some stuff, like one guy said, a pig will eat anything except, I think it was okra. I don't know what. So pigs, because of what they eat, will often ingest a certain pesticide, which if you don't fully cook the meat, you can actually get into yourself and cause some problems. Circumcision. Well, we won't cover that, but that's interesting. Blood has to be able to clot because you're cutting, okay? How did the Bible know when to do that? The best day in the entire baby boy's life. The Bible gave the solution before man ever knew what the problem was. And how did the Bible leave out the foolishness of science, such as atmospheric conditions, unremitted constipation, delayed lactation, excessive fear, cosmetalluric influences, and bad blood? God gave him the solution. If, notice that's a conditional statement. He didn't even give the Israelites anything for free. He said, you don't have to follow me. You don't have to follow my laws. Just, I'll do this for you. I mean, after all, people today, many religious people say, it's just God's grace and mercy. No, it's if you follow my laws and my statutes, none of the diseases. The treasure map for medical science for thousands of years turned out to be the Bible. But as we know, Jesus said, wide is the path that leads to destruction, or gate. Narrow is the path, gate, that leads to eternal life. So most people are going to try to find a way out of giving God the credit. Or I should say it this way. They're going to try to get out of having to do everything he says. No, just do what he said. Bad blood? The Bible said it's not the blood that's the problem you're talking about. It's actually the life of the flesh is in the blood. How did the Bible know that? Let me give you an example. When science does not start with the Bible, you got your blood cells right there, white blood cells. George Washington. What happened to George Washington? He died at way too early of an age. He should not have died in 1800. No way. Why did he die? Well, he came down with a cold or flu. They think today it was just a cold or flu, okay? So he comes down with this, and he's in bed. Well, medical doctors knew what was wrong. He had bad blood. So what do you do if someone has bad blood? Well, you bleed out some of the blood. You either cut them up here by the elbow or down here, and you put some leeches in, or you just bleed it out. And so they bled him. He didn't get better. Okay, well, if a little bit didn't work, more's got to work, right? So they bled him again, and he died. Do you think he had the best medical doctors that America could get him? Sure. Ignorance is bliss? No, folks. It's not, is it? You see, in Leviticus 17, it says, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. And it's even more specific in another verse. For it is the life of all flesh. Its blood sustains its life. And repeats again, for the life of all flesh is its blood. Now, that should be the end of this lesson. I've got a few more minutes, so I'm doing okay. So now let's get to some more specific data on the coronavirus. There we go. How many of y'all have been to the website, better-news.org? Okay, a few of you have. Mike actually sent it out on Facebook to a bunch of people, and we generally average about 3-4 people per day would be an average. It was mostly on Sunday. Anyways, it did spike up a bit. I think we had 9 on Monday and 20 yesterday or something like that. So it's doing a little bit better. But what's interesting here is this. The link up there on the coronavirus data. Let's see if I can get the mouse, see what I'm doing. You press that link over there and it'll take you over to this set of notes right here. I don't know about you, but have you ever seen any videos in the last week on the coronavirus? Raise your hand if you have. Okay, if you have gone and seen some videos. Sometimes these videos, they'll speak for an hour, hour and a half. You know, like the White House will stand up and this is what we're going to do, and then the vice president gets up and says something for 10 minutes, and Trump comes back and says something else, and then whoever the main doctor is says something else, and there's this lady there. And when everyone else is finished talking and doing anything else, she's the expert, folks. She's a medical doctor. She's the one you want to hear. So if you don't want to have to find your way through these long videos to hear what she actually explains, just press those links up there. Those links will take you right to the part of the video where she's starting, okay? She does an excellent job. And this particular article right here, well, there it is. The next section down there has a link to a person from Stanford University. Well, so what? You can find an academic to say anything, right? Well, this particular person happens to be a professor in medicine, but he's also a professor in statistics. He's also a professor in epidemiological studies, these type of studies, okay? He wrote an article a few days ago saying, we do not have any good data yet on the coronavirus. The data we have is just not complete enough. We only have one single place where we have good data. And it's a small sample set. It's only 700 people. 700 people had the coronavirus. They're in a controlled environment called a cruise ship, okay? So those 700 people all got the coronavirus, okay, fine. So what are their ages? We know that. We can measure every single one of them. We sampled everybody. And how many died? 7. He says, okay. If we were to extrapolate, 7's kind of a small number to pull statistics out of, okay? So 7 out of 700 is 1%. Isn't that a lot less than the 2.3% that the media keeps on repeating? Or the 3%? Yeah, it's 1% right there. What was the average age of the people on the cruise ship? Elderly people. So elderlies are a lot more susceptible to this virus, or at least dying from it, okay? So the actual death rate, according to this statistics and medicine professor, said the actual death rate will probably be between, it's a huge range, it could be 0.025%, which is 4 times less than the flu, okay? 4 times less than the influenza, things that normally go around. And it could be 6 times or 7 times higher than the flu, which is 0.625%. He said that's the range. He said the reason is we haven't sampled enough people. There's probably at least 3 times more people out there has a coronavirus than we know about, at least. And it could be as high as 300 times higher than what we've been able to measure. So anyways, you'll see his data. You can read the whole full article or just read that one paragraph that pulls out some of the key points of it. There's some of the graphs, percentages for the world, things of that nature. The main graph is right there, the one to the left. How many of you all feel comfortable with the idea of exponential growth? Okay, what I'm saying is this. Let's say you got some bacteria in a petri dish. You put one bacteria in. How long does it take to double? Let's say it only takes 1 hour. So in 2 hours, you put one in, an hour later you got 2, right? Hour after that, you just get 2 more? Well, that's true, but that's only because that happens to be a doubling also. So now you got 4. What about the 3rd hour? You just have 2 more and you get to 6? Oh, no, it doubles. You got 8. What about the 4th hour? There's just 2 more, maybe 4 more? No, it doubles that again. You got 16. That's the problem with this virus. They're trying to stop it from this doubling, exponential growth. This doubling is what causes the problem. If it doubles too quickly, then our hospital system can't handle it. And if you can't handle people coming down with needing respirators and everything else, you got a higher percentage of people dying. So you don't want to overwhelm the medical societies. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring down this doubling rate. Well, if you look at that graph, and I could go way down the page, you notice there's a few more graphs on here, okay? Got graphs for countries. There we go. There's the guy right there. I think that's the guy. Daily new cases. That's the number one variable you want to track every single day. You want to track it from the same source because one source gives different numbers than the other source, and they update the databases at different times of the day, and it's just a mess. All you care about is how fast is that thing growing? Good news. I don't know if this is reliable because it could be how we grab samples and how we test things. The good news is in the last 3 to maybe 4 days, the percentage growth every day has gone drastically down. It's still growing. It's still got some exponential growth to it, but it's taken longer to double than what it was just 4 days ago. 4 days ago, we're running in the ballpark of somewhere around 30 to 38% growth per day. Looks like we're down, I don't know if we're half that or not yet, okay? But again, it could have to do with the way they take samples and the test cases, things of that nature. So if you want to help your neighbors and friends, send them to better-news.org. And you know what we're really trying to do is get people to go to a better source of information, including some religious information that's available there, okay? And then for those people who have neighbors and friends who the children are home because the schools are shut down, there's also some websites out there they can take to keep their kids kind of actively involved. But anyways, let me see. Let's change this back. Anyways, that's the end of the lesson.